Since taking office on January 20th, 2025, President Trump has consistently directed the full force of his America First doctrine at the European Union. Just 3 days after his inauguration, he used his January 23rd address at the World Economic Forum in Davos to criticize Brussels' trade practices, telling the assembled business leaders, "From the standpoint of America, the EU treats us very unfairly, very badly. They have a large VAT tax. They don't accept our farm products. And they don't take our cars, yet they send cars to us by the millions." A month later, during his first cabinet meeting on February 26th, he further solidified his position on Europe's security obligations. When questioned about whether the United States would extend broad guarantees to Ukraine, he responded bluntly, "I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that," casting doubt on traditional US defense commitments and signaling that European capitals must increase their defense spending or risk reduced American support. By the end of March, Trump had shifted his focus back to trade, using Truth Social to issue what he called a warning shot. He stated that if the European Union collaborated with Canada to harm the US economically, large-scale tariffs, much higher than initially planned, would be imposed on both in order to protect the close relationship each of those countries has with the US. In early April, Trump escalated the situation further, unveiling a 20% tariff on all imports from the EU and labeling Brussels as a foe that rips us off. He remarked, "They're very tough, very, very tough traders. You think of the European Union as very friendly, but they rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. We're going to charge them 20%. He also claimed that the EU was created to harm the United States, making it, in his view, a rival worse than China. Most recently, Trump tied tariff relief directly to Europe's energy purchases. In a late April statement, he said, "We have a deficit with the European Union of $350 billion and it's going to disappear fast. One way that can disappear quickly is by them buying energy from us. If they buy it, we can knock off $350 billion in 1 week. They have to commit to buying a comparable amount of energy." In early April, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen responded forcefully to Trump's tariff announcement, describing his blanket 20% duties on EU exports as a significant blow to the world economy, which would hurt millions of people. She warned that rising costs for groceries, transport, and medicines would most adversely affect the vulnerable, and indicated that Brussels would not remain passive. Within days, she told Reuters that the EU had prepared a strong plan to retaliate against US tariffs, but still preferred negotiation over escalation. She added that the EU was ready to implement it if Washington refused to back down. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed this concern, calling Trump's measures brutal and unfounded, even suggesting suspending French investments in the United States until the tariffs were clarified. In comments captured by The Guardian, Macron further criticized the tariffs as fundamentally wrong and warned that they were causing immense difficulty for Europe, especially at a time when its recovery from previous crises remained fragile. Spain's Pedro Sanchez went even further, comparing the economic disruption to a full-scale crisis, while Ireland's Michael Martin cautioned that the pharmaceutical sector could face severe disruptions if a digital services tax were implemented as a retaliation. Meanwhile, in late May, Ursula von der Leyen made it clear that she would not visit Washington until a concrete trade package could be discussed, stressing that high-level engagement would depend on substantive progress, not just diplomatic gestures. These collective rebukes from the EU's most influential capitals, along with additional comments from Madrid, Dublin, and other governments, show that European leaders view Trump's latest America First strategy not just as a policy disagreement, but as a fundamental challenge to the transatlantic alliance. Before we continue, just a quick reminder, smashing the like button isn't just a tap. It tells the algorithm this conversation matters, and your comment keeps the debate alive. Whether you agree, disagree, or think it's all madness, we want to hear it. Thanks for being part of this. Let's keep going. In recent days, Chancellor Friedrich Merz has taken an unusually firm stance with Washington, insisting that decisions regarding Germany's democratic institutions and the classification of extremist parties remain within Berlin's jurisdiction. When asked on May 7th how Germany would approach its first phone call with President Trump, Merz responded firmly, "The American administration must respect how we manage our democratic institutions and our approach to political parties that are classified as right-wing extremist organizations, emphasizing that such matters are Germany's concern, not that of the American government." By invoking the principle of reciprocity, Merz reminded Washington that he and his government refrained from influencing the US election and made it clear that he expects the same restraint in return. Just a day earlier, in an interview with ZDF, he had already condemned what he called absurd statements from the Trump administration. He urged American leaders to largely stay out of German domestic politics, warning that Europe, acting together, constitutes an economic bloc even larger than the United States and must therefore be treated with due respect. By drawing a parallel to his own non-interference in the US 2024 election campaign, Merz underscored his broader message that sovereign nations must refrain from meddling in each other's internal debates. This firm assertion of German autonomy was prompted by a series of public interventions from high-profile US figures who defended the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD, following its classification by Germany's Domestic Intelligence Service as a proven right-wing extremist organization. On social media, Senator Marco Rubio condemned the designation as tyranny in disguise, while Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking at the Munich Security Conference in February, accused European governments of silencing dissent and praised parties, like the AfD. Even Elon Musk lent his support at a virtual AfD rally, labeling the party the best hope for Germany. Such comments broke with long-standing diplomatic norms and led Berlin to view them as unwarranted interference. In Washington, the response to Merz's public rebuke has been notably muted. A State Department spokesperson reiterated America's commitment to defending democratic norms worldwide, but declined to address Germany's specific decision. Behind the scenes, National Security Council officials expressed disappointment, insisting that their criticism of the AfD was meant to uphold liberal democracy rather than infringe upon German sovereignty. By balancing private displeasure with public restraint, the administration appears keen to avoid an escalating dispute while standing firm on its broader messaging against extremism. Back in Berlin, Merz's stance has found supporters across the political spectrum. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock praised his defense of sovereignty, stressing that Germany values its transatlantic alliance, but must safeguard its own democratic processes. Greens leader Ricardo Lang warned that foreign interventions risk fueling anti-American sentiment among German voters, a concern echoed by recent polls indicating that over 60% of Germans feel Washington frequently oversteps its role as a close ally. The former German Chancellor's stance on US policy has been no better than Merz's. Over the past few months, outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz has repeatedly taken aim at both President Trump's policies and broader US actions, voicing concerns ranging from trade protectionism to climate retrenchment and unwelcome political interventions. In late January and February, Scholz framed Trump's tariff threats as damaging isolationism, denounced the US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, and rebuffed Vice President J.D. Vance's interventions at the Munich Security Conference, insisting that Germany will decide for itself what happens to our democracy and urging Washington to respect European sovereignty. He has also criticized proposals to tie Ukraine assistance to resource concessions and warned that any weakening of NATO's mutual defense guarantee is dangerous. Through these statements, Scholz has sought to defend multilateral norms, free trade, and democratic self-determination against what he views as unilateral, self-centered US actions. Scholz first publicly challenged the Trump administration's opening salvo of 10% tariffs on all imported cars in March 2025. He declared the measure wrong and warned that the US has chosen a path whose end lies only in losers, as tariffs and isolation hurt prosperity for everyone. When pressed in early April to elaborate, he reiterated that tariffs fundamentally harm the world economy, stressing that protectionist barriers undermine the free trade foundations of global growth. At the Petersburg Climate Dialogue in late March, Scholz turned from trade to the environment, expressing deep regret that the USA wants to leave the Paris Agreement, and lamenting America's historic role as the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in history. He framed the withdrawal as a setback for collective climate action, underscoring Germany's determination to continue its climate policy course despite US retrenchment.